from when they were established in 1984. From that time up to today, you will see there is a variety of changes on a number of things, of which you can see when you look at education. Many local authorities or local government areas are having a commendable number of schools. We have ward schools which were started in the 2000s or 90s. You can see these are simple progresses which we can altogether account for. But also in the area of health, you can see we have dispensaries and we have other defined hospitals from the major definition of it, of which are not much on referral level, but at least when you look at the regions, you look at the districts, there are some commendable number of hospitals which can be seen. And when you go to the infrastructure part of it, you look at the roads, you look at the economic infrastructure such as some banks for financial services, you look at the VCOBA and many other services of that nature. You can say at least we have a little bit further we have gone when you compare in the 1990s, 1980s to today. However, the mixed part of it, of the challenges, still the full participation of the people in the local government are still not yet high. And when you look at, for example, you go up to the village level, street level, you find the general participation is not so much high. But also there are issues related with the mismanagement of funds and many other things. As you can go on through the Controller General and auditors of the government revenue, CAG, you will tell there are still a number of things which need to be put across. So the participation of the people still are still the issues. But also the local government cannot be seen alone. It has also been reflected from the central government, and the central government is still with some challenges. Despite, yes, we have the ministry dealing with the regional administration and local government, still we needed to have a number of things to be done to ensure that the people at the grassroots level, they can fully participate in social development, but also they can take full control of their resources, of their nature budgeting and planning, and be comprehensive, so that when we come to read the national budget, they can be reflected. When we come to read the national planning, it can be reflected, and the people at the grassroots level understanding fully what it means to have the local government. So we still have a number of issues which need to be done. One being the capacity building and the embracing the citizen at the grassroots level to participate fully in ensuring that one, they pay taxes very well as it's supposed to be done. They keep the environment, because we have the issues on the environmental issues today. If they are kept at the local level and everybody knows how to keep the sources of rivers and many other things, mention them. At the national level, we can be able to realize some full potential. And at the end of the day, we may say that at least we have moved more further than how it has been in those years.
Paternus Nyagira, a political and economic analyst. Today is the big day for Ukraine and Russia, whose conflict has lasted for over 3 years now, as U.S. and Ukrainian top officials are meeting in Saudi Arabia to explore a way forward for the U.S. support to end the war and provide secure guarantee for Ukraine. United States, Ukraine, and Russia appear to have very different ideas about what a ceasefire should look like. To discuss the talks and its impact to Africa, I am joined by Novatus Igosha, who is a political and diplomacy analyst. Igosha, welcome to TBC News.
Thank you very much.
First of all, how significant is it to Africa that the Ukraine and U.S. talks succeed?
In the first place, it is significant because Africa is immensely dependent on the international system. Now, in terms of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, we rely so much on the importation of grains, especially wheat and barley. And therefore, the conflict has already caused food security challenges in some parts of the continent. On the other side, geopolitically, when a situation like this happens, these powerful countries would like small nations to have to choose sides. So it's a little bit difficult for countries like ours to remain neutral, despite our strong, significant neutral foreign policy since the early 1960s, and of course when it was brought back in 2001. On the other side, it is important peace happens, because the continent itself in Africa, we have our own conflicts that are ongoing. For example, in the DRC, at the same time in Sudan. Therefore, if peace happens on the geopolitical stage, it's going to de-escalate the situation in Africa and not exacerbate the challenges leading to peace and development.
If you were to group the effects of this war trickling down to African countries like Tanzania, how would you define them?
Number one, particularly on the economy, because we are dependent on the supply of oil from Russia, especially Brent crude oil, fuel prices have gone up, and therefore transportation costs have gone up. And if transportation cost goes up, other services also go up. For example, production cost goes up, the cost of food goes up, and this is going to give a very high level cost of living to ordinary citizens. But at the same time, economic-wise, inflation is on the rise. There is the weakening of and the fall of the Tanzanian shillings against hard currencies like the US dollar. And therefore, a situation like this would require us to pause and wait for the negotiations in Jeddah to go peacefully, because it impacts us all on the ground, especially economic-wise.
Now there are tensions between world powers like the US, Europe, we see Russia, China, caused by this conflict. How is this affecting us, the tensions that are happening there?
I would like to quote a certain writer called Leo Tolstoy before I respond immediately. He once said, to sail the future is more difficult than to sail the ocean, because there is nothing there. The future will be made by men and circumstances. Now, coming to the question, the circumstances right now are causing some sort of another Cold War. And in a Cold War, major powers would like developing countries to choose sides. And therefore, a country to have that it needs to be neutral is going to be difficult. But on the other hand, we are being pulled into a very drastic change. We don't know what to do with our own policy relations, either with China or with the European Union or the United States. The right approach is to create measures that are going to be short-term. For example, to invite top official leaders from the United States, for example, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and try to have areas where we can cooperate. A good example is through the health sector. We could have a very significant, what I could call healthy diplomacy between us and the United States. At the same time, try to diversify our trade relations within the region. For example, Tanzania and Kenya and the rest of the East African region, and not become so much dependent on what is happening on the geopolitical stage.
So that you kind of touched on this question that I wanted to ask, of how can Africa position itself to lessen the effects of these tensions that are happening, the global tensions, because regardless of the outcomes of the talks. Now, talk a bit about that, the concrete measures that Africans should take.
Thank you for that. I think the concrete measures should be divided into two. Long-term economic autonomous measures, where this conflict should teach us that it is now significant to have our own strong industrial base. And therefore, to trade with the United States, we need to import the technology. The same relationship with China and the European Union. But on the other hand, we need to have a people-to-people diplomacy, and this is what I call a short-term solving of the situation. It is important, for example, to invite U.S. leaders, especially Marco Rubio, who is the responsible for U.S. foreign policy. And inviting him does not mean that Tanzania is pivoting towards the United States, because in order for a country to do that, it has to change its own foreign policy. But how do you do that? You do that in order to avoid future rhetorical outbursts from these powerful countries. And Tanzania wants to maintain its own neutrality. And therefore, in order for us to be resilient, we need to diversify our trade policies within the inter-regional blocks, for example, East Africa and SADC, but at the same time try to build systems that could last and maintain a neutral policy towards the geopolitical frameworks. And the father of the nation once said back in the 1966 when he was at the United Nations, he said we should avoid being a pawn in the conflicts that involve others. And therefore, we should adopt a position which I could call suitable for us all, peace. We need peace in Tanzania, we need peace in Africa, but above all, we need peace for all mankind across the world.
Would you say during the Cold War, this approach worked for African countries?
It worked, but there was pressure. Some countries wanted countries to choose sides, but we maintained our position. And I think even right now, in the rise of the new preeminent power, the People's Republic of China, and the hegemonic power, the US, and of course Europe, I think this policy would still work.
Thank you very much, Igosha.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, in other news, if the 2025-2035 Industrial Policy Review is implemented, it will position the government better to attain its goal as industrial economy in line with the advancement in science and technology by 2050. Here's a report by Emmanuel Samuel, read to you by Teddy Mparanyanga.
The remarks have been given in Dar es Salaam by some industrial and business stakeholders during the launch of a task force to review the draft of the new industrial development policy and its implementation strategy, where various issues were discussed, including the value addition to local products and access to a reliable market.
As an industries, when we prepare the land and give the investors the land which is ready for investment, including the infrastructure, we need to make sure that the taxes of that land are also rectified and be affordable.
That industrialization is not an automatic event. You must have something which is leading to industrialization. Most of the countries which have developed the industry, they have implemented a lot of industrial policies. And industrial policy is very diverse. It includes fiscal policy, monetary policy, education policy, trade policy. So this is, you can say, is a main policy for development.
So we want that our departments align together and set their standards, so at least any manufacturer should not face challenges concerning to the standards. I hope that resolution will come out and we will have the fix one standard to follow.
On the other hand, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Industry and Trade, Dr. Shahil Abdallah, and Executive Director of the National Chamber of Commerce, Dr. Godwill Wanga, says the stakeholders' recommendations are of great value in securing major reforms in the country's industrial sector.
We have taken into account all the feedback you provided regarding the review of industrial development policy. We have received it and we will process it so that the intentions of the Honorable President to establish a supportive economy can succeed with the document we are preparing.
Policy which you have reviewed today and which you are planning to put in place is focusing mainly on value addition. And value means that we wanted to value more, we wanted to add more value to our natural resources. So the policy is focusing more on how to add value through industrial development.
Access to land at affordable price and reliable electricity in industrial operations are among the key issues raised by the industrial stakeholders.
The government has spent 1.2 trillion shillings to implement clean water and sanitation projects in Dar es Salaam during the 4 years of the 6th phase government, whereby 2.4 million residents have benefited from the projects. The remarks have been made in Dodoma by the acting chief executive officer of DAWASA, Mkama Bwire, while outlining the authority's achievements in 4 years of the 6th phase government, insisting that the implementation of the projects has increased access to clean water.
The projects that have been completed and are currently ongoing amount to approximately 1.2 trillion over a period of 4 years. These projects involve clean water initiative and environmental sanitation projects. Of these projects, the clean water initiative account for around 800 billion, while the projects related to environmental sanitation are about 400 billion. Some of these projects have been completed, while others are still in progress.
Furthermore, the acting CEO adds that the plans are in place to deal with illegal water services connections, which include providing education as well as setting a scientific system that will control the habit.
Connecting water without following the proper procedures is contrary to the water laws we have established. We have instituted procedures for improvement despite the existence of laws. We believe that the first priority is community involvement and education. We have started engaging with local government officials.
Truck drivers in Tanzania say lack of health checkups when crossing borders to neighboring countries is a major cause of contracting infectious diseases like Mpox. On the 10th of March this year, the Ministry of Health in the country issued a statement on the confirmation of 2 cases of Mpox, one of which was a truck driver who had traveled from a neighboring country to Dar es Salaam.
Karibia Tanzania iboda zote. Vituo vya kupima afya vipo.
There are health testing center and there are customs.
Sisi madereva tushakuwa na mazoea tunachukulia.
We drivers don't have the luxury of a health check, so as long as our documents are in order, that is all we care about.
Ikiwa mtu huyu atafika karibu na kituo cha afya.
If the patient arrives at a health center and receives medical attention, the first step is we treat the symptoms of fever, body weakness and pains, and provide medication, and eventually the patient recovers immediately.
Meanwhile, Dr. Omari Mwangaza, the coordinator of Kinondoni Municipality's medical services, says the announcement of the 2 cases in the country is not a threat, that people should be cautious and avoid handshakes, hugs with strangers, and avoid staying in a congested area. Mpox, formerly known as monkeypox, was first discovered in Copenhagen, Denmark in 1958, and in Africa for the first time it was discovered in Congo in the 1970s. Minister of Finance Dr. Mwigulu Nchemba has presented to the Parliament in Dodoma the government's proposed budget framework for the 2025-2026 financial year to the Parliamentary Budget Committee, which later is expected to sit down and conduct an extensive analysis of the proposed budget framework. The government has proposed to collect and spend a total of 57.04 trillion shillings for the year 2025-2026, equivalent to an increase of 13.4% compared to the budget for the fiscal year 2024-2025 of 50.29 trillion shillings. Now, before we wind up local news, let's have a look at today's exchange rates according to the Bank of Tanzania, BOT. Do not miss TBC News every weekday to know all the latest in exchange rates. Time now for all the latest in international news. In international news, 27 civil society organizations have laid off over 1,000 employees following the suspension of foreign aid by the United States of America's new administration. This was highlighted in a meeting with the Vice President of Botswana, the United Nations Resident Coordinator, some officials of the Ministry of Health and other stakeholders in the health sector at the office of the President on Monday.
Botswana has been fortunate to receive various amounts of aid funds over the years, and this year it was expecting $54 million from the government of the United States of America to support programs in the health sector, notably funding for direct service delivery and technical support in HIV and AIDS prevention and care programs. In the wake of U.S. aid funding freeze, the Vice President met with this delegation to discuss challenges and identify the significant and immediate impact resulting in reduction of primary healthcare services for prevention of spread of HIV and AIDS, as well as to map the way forward.
We are under budgeted with that much, especially hard hitting for the civil society organizations, like I've said. But then also, if you look at that and you compare with what we spent as a government on that, we spent just about 9 billion pula on healthcare as a country per annum. So yes, it matters. It is quite a bit of something. By and large, Botswana is still able to quite a huge impact in terms of employment because we affected over 1,200 people by and large, they're directly employed. Kids on these civil society organizations.
So in the HIV/AIDS sector, immediately what we see is a reduction, significant reduction of outreach to populations who are at risk of catching HIV, particularly you could say from the sex workers, from young girls, adolescent girls, and also the LGBTQI community. So there are a number of people who are extremely vulnerable, and they're sometimes falling outside of the regular health system. So those are people who are being served often in parallel with government by civil society organizations or NGOs. So we're going to turn this crisis into an opportunity to just get much better at what we do, to make sure we continue serving the people of Botswana.
However, the Minister of Health assures Botswana that all is not lost.
There's been a lot of wastage in the sector. There's better coordination and planning such that
we need to ensure that there is better planning and coordination so that different services and support coming into Botswana are utilized properly to prevent wastage.
Because proper planning and coordination, we try to feel at the end of the day, really more streamlined and achieve the same for less.
Mr. Wokedize reiterated that government remain resolute to provide quality healthcare services to all its citizenry. And currently, consultative meetings between stakeholders are ongoing with set timelines to fill in the noticeable gaps.
Zimbabwe is tapping into its natural resources to boost electricity generation while promoting clean energy. In Manicaland, the province's mountainous terrain and flowing rivers are being used to generate hydroelectric power, supporting the country's move towards renewable energy solutions. This initiative aims to increase electricity production while reducing reliance on traditional energy sources.
As Zimbabwe is embracing clean energy systems, the establishment of run-off river hydroelectric power projects in Manicaland is gaining traction, riding on the thrust to solve power supply challenges. Nyangani Renewable Energy Operations Manager Takuzwa Chigwande outlines the operations of the main hydropower plant.
Here we're at Nyamingura Power Station, and it's a 1.1 megawatt power station, which is driven from Nyamingura River, which is from the massif of Nyangani mountain. So it is a river which normally does full flow of 3,000 liters per second or more. And on this machine, we would need around 1,000 liters per second to generate 1.1 megawatts. However, our head on Nyamingura is 108, which gives us around 11 bars of pressure to run this turbine. At Nyamingura, we've got a turbine which is called the Francis turbine, but this one is a horizontal Francis. And Kariba, I know it's a vertical one.
The self-excitation system is another process, while the turbine hydraulic governor is important in completing the power generation system.
The turbine is spinning, the machine is spinning, but the generator is not yet producing any power. So we have to excite the generator. By exciting, we are injecting direct current onto the generator rotor. The generator rotor creates a magnetic field from the direct current, which has been injected by the excitation panel. Then that magnetic field, as the turbine is spinning, we are cutting the magnetic field. Then we have an induced current, which is now alternating current. On the other side of the turbine case, we have got the hydraulic governor unit. This is the unit that operates the turbine. It's particularly looking at the turbine.
Synchronizing the generator to the grid is the last stage in the power generation process.
The machine is adjusting to suit what the grid is giving us. So currently, as it goes slower and slower and slower, it means we are getting closer to synchronism. There it goes. So we are synchronized. And you heard the sound, it means you're synchronized. 49.74, 49.73, 432, 435. This is showing that we are just maybe 0. We're very, very close. 99%, 99.9% close. And that's when we synchronize.
The establishment of mini hydropower projects is in line with the Zimbabwe's energy self-sufficiency agenda.
On that note, we're ending our news bulletin for tonight, but do not miss our next bulletin in Kiswahili at 11 p.m. I am Faida Ngaga. Good night.